Good, I guess afternoon at this point, isn't it? Good afternoon, everyone. We've moved our work session outside. Obviously, there's a lot of people interested and wanting to hear the information. During our agenda at our 7 o'clock, we will have an opportunity for public hearing and public input. At this point, it's going to be a presentation to council from staff to ask questions about what we may have. It's an informal meeting, work session of council. And again, there will be opportunity for input at our 7 o'clock meeting when we have the public hearing on this issue. And this is just a chance for us to ask some staff some questions, and I'm sure there'll be some time afterwards as well that we'll all be around and have an opportunity to have conversation with you. But for the sake of the work session, it's primarily a chance for council to talk to staff, get updated on the issues. And of course, we wanted to move it out here because there's a lot of people interested in this issue, and I want to hear it as well as we do. So 204 is just a little bit too small to contain it. So thank you for being with us tonight. And with that, I'm going to open up our work session on Monday, September 9th, 2019. Our only item on the agenda is discussion of the ordinance amending section 22-4 of the Aiken City Code regarding the discharge of firearms and other weapons. And I will recognize our city manager, Mr. Stuart Bedenboss. Stuart?
Thank you, Mayor. Tonight, or this afternoon's work session, we are here to discuss ordinance that would amend the Aiken City Code. And I guess the genesis of this goes back to the Woodside POA conducting a referendum to cull deer, and when they were informed that the ordinance, our city ordinances would not allow the culling of deer with firearms, they did not go through, of course. We had some meetings with them, with the mayor and with council members Gerardo and Gregory to learn more about the issue and to sort of chart where do we go from here. Now, the one thing to keep in mind for council and our residents is that this ordinance is a citywide ordinance. It is not specific or germane to a particular neighborhood or subdivision. It would be in effect for the entire city. The other thing, the way the ordinance is currently written, adds a paragraph. Right now, there are 3 paragraphs in section 22-4, numbered A, B, and C. This would add a paragraph D, which is separate and distinct. And please correct me, Mr. City Attorney, Mr. Smith, if I'm wrong, that this is separate and distinct from paragraphs A, B, and C.
That's correct.
So this is not a case where A has to be in effect or B or C in order for D to come into effect. It is separate and distinct from the previous paragraphs A, B, and C. So though at this point in time, those are the introductory comments that I have, and we can open this up for council discussion and questions of me and any relevant members of staff. And I would like to ask Officer Davis if the chief is out there, if he could come in, because I know he was involved in this. Chief Baranko. Thank you. So I just wanted you close at hand, Chief. We're not ready for you yet, but we are going to begin discussion with council and staff regarding this ordinance amendment that council will contemplate and consider tonight.
They don't change it. I mean,
That's
this
correct.
is separate and distinct. Yep.
I was just clarifying with council, Mr. Bedenbaugh, that on Exhibit A in the agenda item, A, B, and C are the current.
Yes.
It is written. The only thing that adds is a section D.
That is correct, Mayor. A, B, and C have been in the code for a number of years. And again, the way it currently sits, as everyone knows, currently it is not legal in the city of Aiken to discharge a firearm, specifically for the purposes that that raised this issue back some months back.
Okay.
And in the potential new ordinance, we would maintain A, B, and C and incorporate D, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Correct.
So just to clarify, the discharge of firearms within the city limit will still be prohibited unless D comes into effect. And according to D, and here's something that I just want to state, is that granted this ordinance got brought before us because of the Woodside Plantation Property Owners Association potential call on deer. Upon viewing this ordinance and guidance from our city attorney and Chief Baranco and DNR, we are now looking at an ordinance that is a city-wide ordinance, which kind of now incorporates every aspect of our city, not just that said neighborhood,
Correct.
as you mentioned, Stuart. However, you know, it being now a citywide concern, we on council, and I don't want to speak for anybody else, but me in particular, have to look at this ordinance and do what's best for the entire city in any future potential and/or hypothetical scenarios that may arise with wildlife, et cetera, et cetera. But I just want to clarify that as the current ordinance states that the discharge of firearms is prohibited, this potential new ordinance, and I know I just asked that, but I'm going to ask it again, still prohibits the discharge of firearms within the city limits.
Correct.
Unless an appropriate entity has received a permit from the South Carolina Department of Natural Resources after they've gone through the application process for that permit, and then DNR would issue a permit with all of the regulations that have to be complied with in order for that particular area to allow the culling of deer. That's what D allows.
Or any other wildlife scenario that
Correct.
may arise, because this isn't about just deer, correct?
That's correct.
Correct.
It refers to the removal of destructive and/or hazardous wildlife.
And wildlife is defined certainly as opposed to domesticated animals,
Correct, correct.
like house pets, I guess.
And,
Allow for coyotes to be taken out?
If it's, if the study or the regulations deem them destructive or hazardous, it would.
Was that,
I'm sorry.
is that included in this, Gary?
What's that?
That coyotes could be included in this also?
I would defer to DNR. Okay? All Section D does is set forth the language that is necessary in order for an organization to apply to DNR for a permit.
So they-
DNR would then tell them it's okay to hunt coyote or whatever else it might be, but DNR would have to be the final arbiter on that.
We wouldn't have control over what they're calling.
DNR is going to be in complete control over what gets hunted.
In Article 6 of the state statute, it actually says authority to kill bobcats.
Right.
So, I mean, yeah, I think,
so anything deemed wildlife
Correct.
would fall under that umbrella
By DNR.
by DNR.
Yep.
So DNR would be supervising the deer culling,
That's correct.
so it'd be a
Or
specific,
animal calling,
animal
correct.
culling.
Correct.
Specific day and time period for this to take place. So no one would be allowed outside or during the time that the culling is taking place.
Right. They've, I mean, the permit that DNR issues would very specifically tell them all of the parameters they would have to comply with in order to stay in compliance with the permit.
But does DNR need to be on site when that happens?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
I don't believe so.
Or who's supervising the sharpshooters?
Right.
'50, 1130 actually goes on to say landowners to kill raccoons and squirrels destroying crops also. So, I mean, the unintended consequences could be that, well, I have squirrels eating my pecans, so I'm gonna go to DNR and
Tell them you go shoot the squirrels.
get a permit to shoot squirrels.
Mr. Smith, can you go into more detail as to what the process would be for whatever said organization, school district, city, whatever, besides the application to DNR within the city? What involvement would city have with DNR and the application process? And what would they have to undergo to get approved to perform this organized, managed, third-party call or?
I think the primary interaction between DNR and the city would be for DNR to communicate with Chief Barranco and his guys at Public Safety. And I'm sure they would run it by them before they issue a permit. And they'll talk about if there's any local things that DNR needs to be aware of. You know, DNR has local agents here, so they're familiar with Aiken County and the city of Aiken. And so they would, if they felt like they needed to, they would be able to consult with Chief Barranco and get his input as part of the permitting process. It's my understanding, as you apply for the permit, there's this analysis of the area to be permitted that has to be done to show the level of the hazardous wildlife, whatever that hazardous wildlife is that's within that area. And DNR will not issue a permit if you don't meet a certain threshold. And so it would have to be something where DNR believes it's something where action needs to be taken, or they won't issue the permit.
I've actually spoken to DNR, and they have expressed to me certain scenarios that have occurred throughout the state of South Carolina and Georgia. But I'm just curious with the rest of council, or Gary or Stuart, you know, about what your information is about potential scenarios that can occur within the city of Aiken, as far as like if we think about a park, Parks and Rec, whether it's Odell Weeks, Generations Park, when it comes into the city. You know, we're sending people out there. We want to encourage people to go to these places, school grounds that are within the city limits. And if we have an issue with, like Mayor Osmond said, raccoons or snake infestation or something that we can't relocate, how apt is that happening around the city? Is this something that can happen around the city in the future, or? Because as it stands now, if something like that were to happen, what are we able to do to fix it?
It's my understanding, if DNR issues a permit for a particular area to harvest dangerous animals, then there are specific sharpshooters who are licensed by DNR to do this. And so they know the parameters. DNR has a history with the shooters. They know the rules. And so DNR would not issue the permit unless they've got one of those, you know, hunters that knows how to do the process correctly in accordance with the DNR regulations.
Okay, so they would have to go through DNR.
This isn't just a bunch of guys in a pickup truck running around shooting people
Yeah,
or shooting
yeah.
things.
And I actually, I'm glad you said that, because that was a major concern that I received from various constituents that I spoke to, is who would come in to do a call
Very specific
anywhere
people.
in the city, who would get hired, what kind of credentialing would they go through? So it is very specific.
They've got to satisfy DNR.
Yes, it would be DNR. The city really doesn't have that discretion. If someone contacted city staff, whether it's public safety or ourselves, and did not have a DNR permit, we would have to send them to DNR for appropriate application for a permit.
The packet clearly indicates the governing entity must submit a permit request to SCDNR. So we have to request a permit. That's not anything that a POA can do, or a neighborhood association, an HOA, as I read that particular statement. The governing entity must submit a permit request to SCDNR. That seems reasonable statement?
I hate to go based on, I'm not sure what that chart is, I'm sorry.
Well, this is it's in our packet. It was the package, I think, probably given to us by the POA. But that's a very important question, because there's a lot of concerns that people have that feel like we're going to go throughout the city and do this, and this is I just can't believe that that would be the case.
Yes, I mean, A lot of phone calls that I have fielded have been of concerns of constituents and the citizens. They seem to believe that people are now going to be able to go out and discharge firearms whenever they see fit, and, you know, shoot a can off a tree whenever they see fit with neighbors around, and that is absolutely not the case. And I want to reiterate that, which is why I tried to reiterate it twice in the beginning of our conversation. But Mr. Smith, what would be the repercussions to a citizen that would do something like that within the city?
Well, they would be in violation of city laws, and Chief Barranco would be looking to arrest them.
We have no liability in this.
Correct.
Even if we make the application, we still have no.
The city can get sued anytime, okay? But legal liability, just as you look at it today in a hypothetical situation, there is no legal liability on behalf of the city, but that doesn't mean they can't stop from being sued. But the city, I don't believe the city would be a party to this permit.
Would we require, in this case, the POA to show proof of insurance to cover?
That's all going to be part of the DNR application process. They'll have very specific requirements as to what they have to do. I don't know if insurance is one of them, but I would be surprised if
I
it
didn't
was.
see it. I'm just asking.
Yeah, I don't know. I would imagine in order to be a certified shooter, you would have to have the appropriate insurance requirements.
Right. But does the organization that's employing these people, do they have to show proof of insurance?
The DNR is going to govern that process. I do not know the answer to that question.
Okay, and when I read it, I didn't see it, so.
Yeah.
I'm assuming the answer then is no.
Again, I believe the shooter is going to be the person that has probably the most responsibility to anybody in order to make sure they do it safely.
It would seem to me that, and it may be too late for tonight's hearing, but we need to have somebody from DNR tell us their process for doing something like this, rather than us trying to guess as to what it might be. But the packet given to us by the POA clearly says the governing entity makes the application. That makes sense to me.
I'm not sure the governing entity isn't the board of the homeowners association.
Well,
I can't tell from
I
this chart.
understand, I hear what you're saying, but DNR can certainly tell us that if we can get them here.
Are we going to have somebody from DNR here?
Would have been nice to have someone. I'd love to hear.
There'll be somebody-
DNR's
There will be someone
They will
from
be here?
DNR here. Yes.
Okay, good.
Yep, they'll be here for the main
Take care of
meeting.
that.
The main meeting. You know, I did so much research and so forth and so on, but I didn't think about looking at the application requirement, so that will be a good question to ask, absolutely.
I'm also very concerned over, does a person doing the shooting get to pick the alley and backstop, or is it approved by a DNR? I have a lot of questions for DNR.
And my assumption would be that that's the case. The DNR would pick a site, and it would be specific to a site. It wouldn't be like, okay, Woodside applied, and now all of Woodside becomes an area. No, it would be a specific site that'd be rather contained. I don't know how big it would be, that we can ask that question. But that would be the area in which they would set that up. That was my understanding from our meeting with DNR when they were here and talked to us.
Does anyone know how many acres are left to be developed in Woodside subdivision? Of course, you know, the deer are coming, you're interfering with their natural habitat. The flowers are a source of vegetation for them, and,
How
but
many acres they have?
There are hundreds of
That's
acres
still
there, and there's
way-
hundreds of acres that are already annexed and part of the city, and there are hundreds in the county that goes on.
This, by the way.
Which is
That are
contiguous.
contiguous, yes. And it's, I did a walk on Labor Day. My labor was to walk down to the new golf course that they're putting in. It was fascinating to get down there and see it. There's a whole nother golf course being put in, and it's nothing but woods and deer. I saw deer while I was down there, lots of tracks, but actual deer came running along with me. So it was interesting from that perspective. It's a huge area that's back there in the back, and I measured it, the nearest active green was like 3,500 feet from any of this area, in the county, in the city. There's a lot of room out there for right now. Now, it's going to get developed in the years to come, it won't be there, but right now, there's a lot.
I understand the area behind them that's backed up to them, the ridge at Chucker Creek was having some issues with deer. Not as many as, they wasn't encountering
With
as
the
many
deer everywhere. When we met with
right.
DNR, they talked about, they asked the chief, there'd been a lot of increase of deer kills on Whiskey Road, which, of course, Whiskey Road only has a limited amount that's in the city that the chief would be worried about. But the deer range. They don't just live in somebody's backyard and come out and eat grass in the front yard. They go all over the place.
And there have been, what, 25, 22 accidents out at Woodside with the deer?
Yeah, according to the reports from the Property Owners Association, there's been approximately 25 incidents, which I think once we get into the main session, we'll want to ask those questions to Woodside property owners.
I mean, is that over a 3-year period, is that a lot or is that normal?
In answer to the question, there are lots of deer in Jim Lake. We've got plenty over there, and they're in all the subdivisions.
Aiken Estates.
Aiken Estates,
Hitchcock Woods.
Hitchcock Woods.
Westcliff. Go on.
So from the original ordinance, which, in the original ordinance, we are, can you guys elaborate on the original ordinance as far as the 25 acre stipulations and all these things, just so we know how we're shifting from that, if we were to amend the next ordinance, what are the main differences that I think we need to articulate?
If you look at the ordinance, the Exhibit A to the ordinance, and it tells you, Section 22-4, Section A was the original code section in the city code, and that just said it was unlawful to discharge a weapon in the city limits. And then sometime after that ordinance was passed by city council, the legislature came up with a new statute that impacted the discharge of a firearm within the city limits. And so the city council at that time adopted paragraph B that it allowed a property owner to protect the landowner's family, employees, the general public, et cetera, from animals that the landowner reasonably pose a direct threat or danger to the landowner's property. However, in order to do that, you had to have at least 25 contiguous acres of property in order to do that. And there aren't very many tracts in the city that satisfy that particular size requirement.
Right.
And then once the Public Safety Department, I believe we already had a firing range when C was passed, but that was just passed to allow the public safety to operate their firing range.
That is correct. We realized we were not in compliance, so about
Right.
7 years ago, they added paragraph C.
That's why C got added, and then D is the new code section that we're discussing tonight.
I think we also clarified paragraph A that military honor ceremonies were appropriate use of firearms.
Yes, sir.
Council, if you would, in section B, that's the only section where it talks about acreage size, the 25 contiguous acres.
That's directly from the state statute. The state statute included that language, and that's why we included it in the city code.
So as I'm looking over B, landowners discharging a firearm on the landowner's property to protect the landowner's family, employees, the general public, the landowner's property from animals that the landowner reasonably believe pose a direct threat or danger to the landowner's property, people of the landowner's property, or the general public, commit no violation of this section, nor commit any unlawful act. But then, so if my house is on 3 acres, B doesn't apply. Is that?
That's correct.
Is that correct? Because
That's
it goes
correct.
on to say, for purposes of this section, landowner's property must be a parcel of land comprised of at least 25 contiguous acres.
Correct. Now, would Chief Barranco send somebody to arrest the mayor if he shot a rattlesnake in his backyard with a shotgun? I'd be surprised, okay? But, I mean, that language is given to us by the state code, and we really didn't have the option to make it any different.
Well, I'd appreciate it if you wouldn't use the mayor in your example next time. Yeah, I got it, but it is, I mean, so, I mean, I wonder if the contiguous acreage wouldn't be applicable to something in D as well. I
I believe the DNR process.
They probably
It's
have
also
that.
in the statute supersedes the 25 acres.
Okay.
So basically, Section A is, regardless of the size of your property, is deferring to an imminent threat, which is allowed regardless of whether or not you're on 1 acre or 25 acres. And then Section B is there's a surrounding threat. It's not imminent, but it's surrounding, and if you wish to take care of it, you technically should be on at least 25 contiguous
Yes.
contiguous acres,
Yes, ma'am.
just to clarify those two sections.
All right, does council have any more questions?
No, I think we're ready for the meeting. We need that DNR person, and we need some
Yeah, we should
POA,
have had
and
DNR here.
the opportunity for the folks to tell us their thoughts.
All right, very good. Well, we're going to be around, I know you're here too, so obviously we're happy to have individual conversations. I'm going to close our work session at this point, and we'll start our meeting promptly at 7. We have this issue at the first of our agenda, so you won't have to sit through stuff you don't want to hear. If I'm assuming you're here for the deer, but so we will certainly move that way. We're going to, just to let you know, we're going to try to conduct a very orderly meeting. We want any information that needs to be said, and we'll certainly allow it. At some point, whenever there's this much passion about issues, when you start hearing the same thing over, I will ask for new information if it is. And I think because of the magnitude of people we'll have here, I'll certainly allow for everyone to express through raising a hand or some sort where you're at on this to express that as well. So we'll conduct an orderly and positive meeting so we can get information. I mean, I think that's an important part to explain to, and we will at the 7 o'clock meeting, but the public hearing, it's not about sheer numbers, it's about information so that this council can make an informed decision. And certainly we make a better decision whenever there's public input, so we appreciate that and appreciate you being here. So anyway, work session, as you can see, is adjourned.